It is a commonly held belief that nothing lives in the Secundan exclusion zone. It is an area known as Xenomundus or Alien Land, and yet there are some who not only live there, but thrive there. They are the Ferrymen, who traverse the Secundan wastes in their custom rigs. They are hired by outsiders as guides to the Secundan Abyss. So join me as I build, paint, and discuss the Abyssal Ferrymen teams, this time on JD in the Sump Sea. Welcome back to JD in the Sump Sea. I'm Jay, and today we're talking about the Abyssal Ferrymen teams and custom rigs of the Underhells Campaign from Hive Secundus in Necromunda. I'll talk about the inspiration for where the Abyssal Ferrymen teams came from, the rules, some of their lore. I'll build and paint an Abyssal Ferrymen team and custom rig, and then I'll go through how I built my team rules-wise and why. And if you like scratch building and painting Necromunda models, and gang building and discussing campaigns, then consider liking and subscribing by busting out your Warhammer and smashing that like button and smashing that subscribe button, and don't forget to hit that bell icon so you don't miss any of our videos. Now back to the Abyssal Ferrymen teams. So who are the Abyssal Ferrymen, and where did Games Workshop get that name from? Well, in Greek mythology, the ferryman is known as Charon. He ferries the spirits of the dead from the land of the living across the river Styx in the underworld to Hades. The Greeks and Romans would put coins in their mouths or hands, or perhaps over their eyes, of their deceased to serve as fare so the dead could pay the ferryman. Charon has been portrayed in video games such as Castlevania Symphony of the Night and in the Clash of the Titans movie remake. He's also in Dante's Inferno and Shakespeare's Troilus and Cressida. So just as Charon ferries shades or spirits through the underworld over the river Styx, so too do the Abyssal Ferrymen ferry adventurers from the dust wall to the depths of Hive Secundus. These ferrymen are not officially acknowledged by the Imperial House to exist, the official stance being that after bombarding Hive Secundus with gravitic warheads to purge it of the gene stealers that plagued it, there were no survivors. And yet, in some places where gene stealers survived as malstrains, so too did others survive in enclaves scattered throughout Hive Secundus. The ferrymen offered their services as guides to those who make it past the dust wall. Many actually take the trip to Hive Secundus, hoping to find ancient archaeotech and other valuable items. And of course, for a small fee, the Abyssal Ferrymen are happy to help. So now I'm going to start painting my skipper. I start with Warcolor's Nostalgia 94 Hawk Turquoise, and I apply it to his pants. Then I use some Serpent Bite leather and mix in some Skull White to paint his hat and trench coat. Chaos Black is next, and I'm using this as a base coat for anything metal he has, like his shotgun or his bolt guns. I find that basing anything that I want to paint a metallic color with black first will make the metallic color look way better. I wanted to paint his boots, gloves, and belt a darker brown, so I mixed up some Mournfang brown from Citadel with some Chaos Black and then got to painting. This video shows my first experience with several Army Painter paints, the first one being Death Metal. I first heard about this paint from the Tabletop Minions YouTube channel. Uncle Adam said this was one of his favorite metallics, so I figured I'd buy it and give it a try. I think it's a neat color, but I don't think using it on this bolt gun is the right place for it. I then switched to Mithril Silver and paint his shotgun and parts of his bolt gun. After painting the shotgun and highlighting parts of the bolt gun, I also paint the bolt gun on his back and the metal shoulder armor. I realize at this point I don't really like the look of the death metal color on his bolt gun, and I used a lead belcher to cover it up with a large dry brush. I used some Goblin Green to paint a small bit of detail inside his trench coat. I then used Skull White and paint what looks like purity seals on the inside of his trench coat. I use Chaos Black as a base coat on his chainsword hilt and his bionic eye, which I will later color silver. I paint some bronze flesh color with white and red and get a salmony color to paint his neckerchief with. I mix back in some more bronzed flesh color and paint his face. I then paint his bionic eye and chainsword hilt, the chain on his belt, and the 3 buttons on the back of his trench coat with lead belcher. It's at this point in painting that I really like because when you apply contrast and washes, the entire model will start to come together. I really like using Agarose Dune's contrast paint on the yellowy tan color of his trench coat. It adds depth and shadows and makes it look grungy, which is exactly how I feel he might look since he spends most of his days out in the Secundan wastes. Then I bust out the old standby Agrax Earthshade. It's unfortunate that they changed the formulation of this paint, but I was able to grab some of the old pots before they all disappeared. I apply the Agrax to the metal parts, his pants, his head, boots, and gloves. Basically everything besides his trench coat. Now onto the base. I mix up some gray from white and black and paint his base completely with it. I didn't want to cut off the metal tab on this mini that sticks it into the slotted base, so I had to paint something onto the base. I take some black and make a checkerboard pattern. I then use some Army Painter Fresh Rust, again a suggestion from Tabletop Minions, link in the description below, and I really like this stuff. I use it a lot on the custom rig, which you'll see later. I use the Fresh Rust and paint L-shapes in the gray squares. I then use Games Workshop's contrast paint, Garagax Sewer, and spread it around the whole top of the base to make it look dirty. I dry brushed the top of the base with Mithril Silver, then added Fresh Rust again in splotches across the base. I mixed a few colors to make a brown and painted up the edge around the base. And the model's done. I started off with just painting the model white with Warcolor's Nostalgia 94 line Skull White. Then I used Serpent Bite leather from that same line and painted his pants. The gray I had mixed up from earlier for the base of my skipper, I then used again on the boots of the rig hand. I used Games Workshop's Mornfang Brown and painted his belt and all the pouches attached to it. I mixed in some bronzed flesh with an orange and then painted his skin. I needed his weapons silver to stand out, so I painted all the metal parts on the model with Chaos Black to act as a nice dark base coat for the silver. I mixed up some bronzed flesh and serpent bite leather to get a yellowy tan color that I then used to paint his shirt and armband. I then painted over all the black once it was dry with lead belcher from Games Workshop. I painted the handle of his mace with a dark orangey brown. I used Skull White to tidy up the skulls and his horns on his helmet. I mixed up a dark green by mixing Goblin Green with Chaos Black and painted the grenade on his belt and then the grenade in his hand. I used Agrax Earthshade to then tie him all together. I covered everything except the white spots and his flesh with Agrax. I painted over the silver of his helmet with Death Metal from Army Painter. I then used Army Painter's Flesh Wash on all of his skin. Games Workshop's Contrast Paint Skeleton Horde is great for using on bones, so I then used it over all the white bits, including the horns sticking out from his helmet. I did some light dry brushing of Mithril Silver over all of the metal bits at the end, just to give them a bit more pop. It was then time to paint his base. I used Craft Store bought craft paint to cover his whole base in black. When that was dry, I used an orange I mixed up and splotched it on his base. I took Mithril Silver and dry brushed the base. I then covered the whole base in Agrax Earthshade. I mixed up a new brown color and then repainted the rim of the skipper's base and painted the base of the rig hand's rim also. This is the problem with mixing colors, is that it's not always easy or possible to replicate a color you created one day and then in the future make that same color again. However, I really like mixing up new colors for Necromunda gangs since there are so few models, and hopefully I won't need to color match anyone from the gang 6 months later. Many years ago, I was at a Goodwill and I found a toy Bradley fighting vehicle for only 50 cents. It was missing the treads, but I figured that wasn't a problem. I wanted to use it for some sort of converted 40k vehicle in the future, and it's funny how now Necromunda has allowed me to finally use it, and not 40k. Well, I wanted to make this a wheeled vehicle, not a tracked vehicle, so I had to cut off all the little wheels that the treads would have rolled over. Once those little wheels had been cut off, I then had to snip the little plastic nubs that were left behind. This plastic was much harder than Games Workshop plastic kits, so my snips were definitely straining, but they did the job. I then needed to remove the turret, and I would have just unscrewed the whole thing and gotten inside to unscrew the turret, but the screws in the bottom required some sort of weird bit which I didn't have, so I decided to just try and break off the turret with pliers and brute strength. This combination of tough plastic and not having the correct bits really changed the direction of this conversion. I had originally thought that I would cut off the top and back of the vehicle and then guys could ride inside, but I couldn't really cut the top or back off easily and ended up deciding everyone would just ride on top. I eventually got the turret off, but of course I saved it because I figured I could use it as detail bits later. I needed to somehow fit wheels on this thing, so I used these big yellow wheels which I believe are from an old Erector set, but I really am not sure. I had to affix them to the bottom of this thing, so I used super glue and put it all around the axle of the wheel and then used black electrical tape and taped the wheel to the underside of the vehicle. I repeated that for all 6 wheels and then added more tape afterwards to reinforce it. I figured the bottom of this would probably never be seen, so it doesn't really matter what it looks like. I really wanted to add a big plow or cow catcher or ram type thing to the front, so I used a bunch of green stuff and super glue to affix an old Imperial Guard tank bit to the bottom of the vehicle, and then the other end of that bit I attached a Ramshackle Games resin cast ram piece. I really recommend Ramshackle Games, especially if you want to make custom vehicles for Necromunda. They have a huge range of resin pieces you can order individually. I have the link in the description below. I just bought the Ash Waste box set recently. I did an unboxing video which you can watch here, and the link is in the description below as well. And in that box, there are a ton of great bits that can be used as terrain or as vehicle parts. I glued 2 walkway sections from that box set together to use as the transport bed. I then cut chunks off the turret and used them as ablative armor panels on the sides of the custom rig. Something I think these Abyssal Ferrymen would do out in the Secundan wastes would be to really customize their vehicles with whatever they found out there. It'd be for decoration, but also as extra armor. I then cut up some cereal box cardboard into rectangles and glued them onto the sides of the vehicle. I dry fit the transport bed pieces and realized I would need to have some sort of supporting beams underneath them to hold them to the top. I had this interesting cylinder piece, and I then had the idea of adding a crow's nest onto this vehicle. I tried to glue it down to the front of the vehicle, but I realized later it would need some reinforcing. I glued some sprues down to hold the transport bed. Then I glued down a platform from the Ash Waste box set onto the front side near where the crow's nest would be. As I was gluing it down, the crow's nest came off. This was a job for green stuff. I took some in my hands, rolled it out really long and thin, and then affixed it around the bottom edge of the cylinder and then put it on the vehicle. I glued another piece of cardboard that I curled around the crow's nest partially to add detail and a more armored look, but also to cover up the use of the green stuff. As I added a balsa wood panel to one side, the top transport bed piece came off again. I knew once again that I would need green stuff to make this happen. So I made some balls of green stuff and put them onto the bottoms of the transport bed sections, then pressed it down onto the sprue struts. This would finally make it secure. I then started adding short walls to act as cover for the transported fighters around the sides of the transport bed. I continued adding panels and detail bits to various areas of the vehicle, fleshing out the detail and armor paneling. This piece at the top of the crow's nest was part of a 3D printed truck my buddy Mike gave me. I added a ladder to get up to the crow's nest. I also added a ladder to the back of the vehicle so the transported fighters could get easily on and off. These ladders both also came from the Ashways box set. It was at this point that I thought it was playable, so I played it in week 1 of the Underhells Campaign with this build. I wasn't really satisfied with the vehicle just yet, but I needed something for the campaign. Here are some shots of it with my Venator gang and Abyssal Ferrymen atop it. Obviously, I hadn't yet painted any of these models. This is one thing I like about campaigns, and particularly how we run them at our game store, Old Guard Games, link in the description below. We allow people to come play with a partially built gang and an unpainted gang, with the idea that they can use the campaign to build and paint a new one. As the campaign progresses, so too do the gangs. They go from unpainted to painted by the time the campaign is done, and it's great to watch. As you can see, I added a lot more detail, including the skulls from the Games Workshop Skulls box set. I figured these were the Ferryman's trophies from hunting big beasts out in the wastes. I added parts from the Data Crystal Stacks kit, including the containers that hold the data crystals. Again, these are things they would be familiar with and probably harvest themselves. I added some bulk and detail to the crow's nest and replaced the sniper rifle with a grenade launcher. One thing I was missing was rivets. I thought it needed more rivets, so I remembered some videos I saw a long time ago about adding rivets to terrain and vehicles by using little pearls or gems that you can get from craft stores. So I went to Michael's and I found these. They have sticky backs, and with a little bit of super glue, they stick on the piece and should stay there. I added a bunch of rivets to both sides of the vehicle and on the crow's nest. I then decided to do a dry brush of lead belcher to the entire thing. It took a while, but I think the result is great. It is also a great base to further paint the piece. I also painted a few sections with the death metal paint from Army Painter just to give it a little variety. I wanted a bunch of the side panels to be different colors since they were large flat sections of metal from all sorts of things that they found in the wastes, and riveted them to the sides of the vehicle. I started painting these panels by base coating them with white. I then used Athermantic blue on some of the panels. At this point I wanted to start with the rust, so I took dark rust from Army Painter and began doing heavy dry brushing in places I thought might get rusty. I then used fresh rust and dry brushed over some of the dark rust. This really made the rust color stand out. I used Enchanted Blue on some of the armor panels, and Goblin Green on others. I then remembered I had just got the Huge Miniatures fluorescent acrylic paint set and decided I had to try it out on this model. This paint set and the whole line of Huge Miniatures paints are available at badgergames.com. And if you use the code JD2025 on your next order, you'll really help out the channel. Link in the description below. So I started with Ultraviolet on some panels, and then I used Blaster Blue on others. I then switched to Starfire Yellow, and then Laser Orange. These colors are pretty great, and I think the results speak for themselves. I went back and touched up a few of the fluorescent colors. And then I used Death Metal again and dry brushed some spots, again for variety. I used the contrast paint Snakebite Leather on the hubcaps and some other parts of the vehicle, and the result was pretty cool. It made them kind of look like a dark brassy color. I went back to a craft paint white color and painted all of the huge skulls on the front of the custom rig. I went back to lead belcher, did a heavy dry brush over most of the vehicle. I was then ready to wash the entire vehicle minus the hubcaps and skulls with an Agrax Earthshade. Once that was dry, I dry brushed Lead Belcher all over it again. I used Skeleton Horde contrast paint on the skulls, which really brings out the details. I then went back to Dark Rust and applied it to the transport bed in strategic spots. It was now time to paint the data crystal stack holding containers. I used Lich Purple from the War Colors Nostalgia 94 line. I painted the pack I glued to the side of the crow's nest in a brown. I also painted the handle of the shovel I glued to the crow's nest that same color. I used Enchanted Blue to paint the lights. I went back to Fresh Rust and dry brushed it in strategic places all over the metal parts again. I used Ultraviolet just to highlight the data crystal stack containers to make it look like they're glowing. And finally the tires. I mixed up some gray and painted them gray and then washed them with a Nuln oil. And that's it. The Ferryman and the custom rig were done. We'll take a look at the results and then go over some rules. The Abyssal Ferryman team is an option in a Hive Secundus Underhells campaign. If you choose the Archaeo Hunter allegiance, then they and the custom rig vehicle come free of charge as additions to your gang. The Abyssal Ferryman team consists of 3 additional fighters, one of them the Steersman, who is a crew-type fighter and who drives the custom rig. Whilst the Steersman has only 1 profile, the Skipper and Rig Hand each have 3 that you can choose from. The Ferryman Skipper comes equipped with mesh armor and 1 skill of your choice from any of the regular skill trees. They may also be equipped with 140 credits worth of equipment valued at a rarity or illegal rating of 10 or less from the trading post. Between the 3 profiles, the skill and trading post access, the Ferryman Skipper is so customizable that they can be equipped to fill almost any hole in abilities your gang may need. The Rig Hand is also very customizable with 3 profiles. He has the same skill access and up to 100 credits of equipment with a rarity of 8 or less from the trading post. The Steersman has access to the driving skill tree immediately, which is awesome because during most campaigns, you'll probably never even be able to use any driving skills. Once you've picked out your profiles, bought your equipment and weapons, and kitted out your custom rig however you see fit, you then get to choose what enclave they hail from. The 4 enclaves each help out in their own ways, from giving you more exploration points, re-rolling failed wound rolls against roaming horrors, providing free weapons and war gear from your house list, or providing medical escorts for your injured fighters. You'll find that these enclaves add to the flavor, but also the effectiveness of the Ferryman teams. So how did I build my Ferryman team? Well, let's get started with Arbal Stinkman, my Ferryman Skipper. His profile is the only one with movement 5 and ballistic skill of 3+. The other 5-inch movement profile had a 4+ ballistic skill, and the other 3+ ballistic skill profile had a movement of only 4 inches. I selected a bolt pistol and chainsword because the gun in his hand is probably a bolt pistol, and it appears that under his cloak he has a sheathed chainsword. He also is holding a shotgun, so I gave him that as well. This is an old bounty hunter model from Necromunda 95, and he actually has another bolter on his back. In the current rules, that's too many weapons, so I just went with the pistol since you could see it from the front of the model. I gave him a drop rig because he knew he would have to sometimes quickly get off his huge vehicle and fix her so he could make me some money during the campaign. I knew I wanted an Ogren for the rig hand, so I picked the profile that is closest to what an Ogren's profile would be. I gave him a huge power maul from an orc knob and 3 types of grenades, since at strength 5 he can throw them 15 inches, which is pretty darn good. I also gave him nerves of steel so he has a chance of getting into combat. For the custom rig, I knew I wanted a transport bed, and the model looks like it is a ram. I also modeled on wheel size to do extra damage to pesky roaming horrors or enemy gangers, and nitro burners so it wouldn't fall behind on a rolling road scenario. I gave it tire claws and all-wheel steering, so its handling is effectively a 5+, not a 7+. And I gave the driver the T-bone skill because it gives the front toughness a D3 boost when ramming, making the ram deadlier and the vehicle more survivable. So I hope you enjoyed our little excursion into the Secundan wastes with the Abyssal Ferrymen. But that's all I've got for you this time, so As always, thanks for watching, and please like and subscribe.